All right. So, hi everybody. My name's Kevin. Thanks for coming. I'm gonna try and give a rundown of some things I've picked up over the years, as far as tips and tricks go for Solidworks. A little bit of my backstory. I've been running Solidworks since 2003. I've been a certified Solidworks Pro since 2004. Played in a lot of different industries with a lot of different things. Seen a lot of crazy things. Seen a lot of really boring things. Come to the point where I think I've got a good idea on how to do a lot of things. Maybe not. I would definitely like this to be kind of a two-way deal. If I'm busy demonstrating what I consider to be the greatest thing that's ever happened to sketching and you think I'm all wet, by all means, put your hand up. Let's have a discussion. It's entirely possible I'm dead wrong. So we'll run with what I think is a good setup for stuff and take what you can from it, and let's have a discussion if there's a better way to do it. So we'll start with some general stuff as far as SolidWorks goes that people may or may not be aware of, things that can help out just in your day-to-day work inside SolidWorks. For those who are curious what the weirdness on the screen here is, my wife and I have a small farm. We keep chickens. I made a chicken coop because these are the kind of things you do when you're bored and you have SolidWorks at your disposal. So some of the things that you can do inside SolidWorks, let's grab just part of this for right now. So one of the things you can do inside in SolidWorks that not a lot of people take advantage of is you're able to go through and group things together and put them into a folder. So all I did, just let me slow down a little bit here in case anybody's walking a little bit. If you pick, shift, pick, you can grab a whole bunch of things in a row. Kind of standard Windows functionality, but it works here. If you're not aware, there you go. At this point, you can do a right click and add things to folders, which is nice if you have a gigantic tree, especially if you get into doing surface work or you just have huge assemblies with lots and lots of things. Folders are your friends. Put things in there, rename, rearrange. You can nest folders in folders, whatever it takes for you to keep track of this stuff. They're easy to take, drag and drop. You can put things in and out of them. Just from an organizational standpoint, trying to wrap your head around what stuff is where, sometimes that's really helpful. You also have the option to rename things. Let's grab just one of these. Assuming I grab it. So you can rename stuff like this. You do a slow click on features inside SolidWorks. You can rename stuff. Things like that. So that seems kind of trivial and boring and whatever else. The biggest advantage I've seen to be doing things like this comes in the form of I could design this, this project, for instance, at a company, and then if I'm on vacation or get hit by the proverbial beer truck and somebody else has to come in and try and use my files later on, trying to figure out what I was doing, if I've named some of this stuff intelligently, they can figure out which bits and pieces of things go together and why. Same general idea with the folders. If you set stuff up correctly, you can make it pretty easy to walk through and find the things you want, especially in huge assemblies. One of the things that you'll run into, especially if you start using folders, you'll notice that you'll end up with a lot of stepped over things in your tree like this. Fast way to do, collapse everything, Shift C. I don't know how many people use that. That's one of those little things that someone pointed out to me like 6 months ago, and it was like the angels sang. That was the coolest thing I'd seen in a while. Super helpful. Again, if you get assemblies inside of assemblies, inside of assemblies, inside of assemblies, which sometimes you do, you end up clicking the wrong part and magically your whole tree gets huge. You can collapse everything really simply that way. Other fun things. How many people are familiar with what this is and have ever used it? Anybody? Okay. This is the shortcut bar that SolidWorks gives you. By default, it shows up under the S key. You can go find it if you need to. This is 100% configurable to whatever you want. If you want to put any commands on here, you can put them on here. And there's a different shortcut toolbar for each of your modeling environments. So for sketching, parts, assemblies, drawings. This right here can look different for every single one. You can make it look the same if you want. So what that looks like to fix, you bring it up, you hit customize, and I'm gonna have to do a little bit of rearranging to keep stuff on here. So here's the shortcut bar that I've got. Inside the customize menu in SolidWorks, you can get through and find all of your commands, all of your buttons, all your flyouts, everything that exists anywhere, and get it. So by default, it goes to your flyout toolbars. You can go grab anything off any of these that you would normally go through. So let's see here. You can grab features, and if you want to have the extrude command, you can drag and drop that on, set that up, and now this is in here and it's accessible on the shortcut bar. You can pull stuff back off here if you don't like it, customize it the way you want to do it. Typically the way I have mine set up, which this is not my box, so it's not set up the way I would normally run. Typically I have sketch tools set up in here in addition to a boss extrude and a cut extrude. Those are the two major commands I use all day long. And then as far as sketching goes, just having that stuff available all the time is very, very helpful. Some of that's going to depend on how you use SolidWorks. So kind of figure it out. If you keep running the toolbar up here trying to go find something too often, maybe this is a good option to be able to get that on here and save you a little bit of wandering around with a mouse. Does anybody do anything with macros ever? At all? A little bit? Anybody not know how to program macros? That should probably be a bit, yeah, okay. Macros are a little funny. If you don't know a little bit of programming, they can be super intimidating. On the upside, SolidWorks can let you record simple macros really, really easy. I had a problem where I have a 3D connection. I don't know which one I have. It's a space ball, the one where you can do the pan, tilt, zoom, rotate stuff. I have one of those. One of the problems you run into as soon as you start using one of that, it turns off the dynamic highlight, so the edges and stuff that highlight as you fly over them with your mouth. It turns that off while you move things around, and then the idea is it turns it back on when you stop. It has a little buggy problem where it stops turning it back on, which isn't a big deal until you start trying to figure out, wait, am I over top of a line or an endpoint or whatever? It gets kind of hard to follow. You can go dig and find it, which let's do it the fun way. If you go Tools and Options, which is also here, Tools, all the way down to the bottom. Tools Options right here. That button is also right here in SolidWorks. Save you a little bit of running around if you have to deal with that. Oh, now where is it again? I think it's Display Selection, Dynamic Highlights. Yeah, this checkbox turns on and off. So what I ended up doing, rather than having to go dig in through this whole thing and do what I just did and wait, where was that, remember how to do it and turn it back on, you can record a macro. If you go under Tools, go down to Macros, Record, it brings up this toolbar right here, which is the Macros toolbar, and it instantly starts recording. So what it does is pay attention to what you click on. So you can go to Tools, go to Options, go find the thing in question, do it, and then when you're done, hit Done. Gives you the option to save the macro. Then that macro does exactly what you just did. So if, for instance, I need that checkbox to always be on, I'd go make it be off, record a macro, turn it back on, save the macro, and every time you run that macro, it's going to want to turn that function back on for you. Saves you a little bit of running around. But
with what you did right there, will it just right now, will that macro just toggle either on or off when every time you strictly off?
It's a good question. I'm not sure if it would. Let's check and see what it does. I'm not sure whether it would toggle or not. I know you can program a macro to toggle both ways. I've set macros before that will do that, but I went in and messed with them from a programming standpoint. I'm not sure which way that would record this time. So this is off right now, right? So let's go record the macro once and see how it plays. So I'm going to record a new one. We're going to go into Tools Options, the quicker way. Go to Display Selection. I'm going to turn it back on. And I'm going to stop there. Drop that. Yeah, we'll just call it macro run. It doesn't matter. Alright, so let's check and see where we are on stuff. Should still be on because I just turned it on, right? So if we go to run this macro, which I'll show you how to put a button for this macro in a second, so you don't have to go down through the tools run. Go here, we'll go find this one, run it. Didn't do much visibly. Let's go see what happened here. This is still checked, so it does not toggle. It'll only do it one way at this point. You can go back in and with a little bit of fancy Google work, you can figure out the right text snippet to put in there to make it toggle back and forth. So, how to put in a macro button then. So if I go back to, if you right click on any toolbar, you can get this customize option. This is kind of what it looked like when we were looking at that shortcut toolbar earlier. Same general idea. We're going to go to commands, macros. Way on the end here, there's a new macro button. With a new macro button, you can drag and drop onto a toolbar someplace. And it'll give you the option to point to a macro, which we can do here. I'm going to point to this one. Gives you the option to pick an image if you want, little bitmap, and it'll show up for what the icon is. By default, it'll have just this standard icon unless you sell it otherwise. So now I've done that. This button is now here. So let's run a little test here in a minute to see how this works. I'm going to turn this one off. Now when I run the macro, we should be able to come back in here and see that it's back on again. So that's just off this one click here. Now you can go a step farther. You can take this thing and you can put it lots of different places. One of the other things that I don't use a whole lot, but I found a use specifically for running macros, is mouse gestures. Does anybody use mouse gestures at all? They're kind of a mixed bag. Some people love them. Some people are like they're the worst thing that's ever happened to the user interface, and I hate it. They have their use. I'm not a huge fan, but they're growing on me a little bit. So what a mouse gesture is this thing. When you hold a right click, you get this fun little wheel that shows up and gives you different options for things you can do. By the normal default, as we're looking at them here, these are just views that you can snap to. So if you run through it, it reorients your part to that view. You can also go through and set what these mouse gestures are, and you can put a macro in those positions. So one of the things that's the way I used these, my last employer, there was a macro that got run on every file to go through and put a bunch of customer information in everything. And then, so I made that macro and assigned that to a mouse gesture. So when I was done with a part, I could do the mouse gesture sweep to run the macro for it, and then I would run the mouse gesture in the other way and make a drawing out of stuff. And what I mean by make a drawing is, on the pull down here, there's this make drawing from part or assembly. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this or has run across it. If you're not, all this does is open up a drawing menu and automatically dump in views from whatever parts you have open, as opposed to start a new blank drawing and then have to insert your views and do a couple things. It saves you a few steps. And because this is a fresh install, it's going to think about it. So when I said make that, make a drawing from part, now I'm going to pick template. It does, I don't have any pre-populated in here. If you have pre-populated views, they come in automatically. If you don't, it comes in and assuming you're going to run it this way, and now you can drag and drop your views out of here the way you normally would. So that make drawing part, or from part or assembly, is beneficial there. Alright, now into the bulk of kind of what I was hoping to get to. A lot of the tips and tricks and kind of everything else that I'm going to talk about is going to drive back to this idea of design intent, which Solidworks has thrown around since the very beginning because that's kind of the whole mantra of how they want to drive a lot of things. And design intent is basically designing your part so that it works the way you want it to. Right? To put it another way, if you follow good design intent, if you are able to capture it nicely, when you walk up to the part, you should be able to make changes really fast and have the things that you think should update will update. So what I mean by that is, let's make a new part once. So I don't know as far as what industries people are coming from. I'm assuming most people here do machine design, equipment design. Anybody do product design in SolidWorks? A little bit. Okay. Product design stuff gets a little bit different in that you stray away from the nice normal flat piece parts. If you make machines, it seems to be a lot of flat plates and stuff that all bolt together. You get into product design, you can sometimes get into some more organic shapes and some other things. That gets a little bit different. Same general concept can come into play, but with machine design stuff, everything being flat and whatever, it's a lot easier to readily see what's going on here. So the way I want to go at this is we're going to start apart. When you do a sketch, standard practice when I first started doing CAD was you went and you did that. You threw your part off from the origin off into that quadrant, which works to a point, does some cool things. It leaves the origin, however, stuck here in the corner, which then means your planes that you're going to play with are all off on the edge, which doesn't help you a lot. And what I mean by that is, this is the standard way I go through and do stuff at this point. If you, this is what I get for not having my shortcuts on here. If you set this stuff up ahead of time, it works. Right. If you go this way, now what you're left with is planes that run through the center of the part, and then also by the time when we go through here and make this into a plate, you've got edges of the plate now that are way out on the edges that you can use for reference on stuff. And you've got planes that run through the middle that you can now use to reference things. That comes really beneficial when you go into start mating things together. You can do things like center everything up because there's planes that run through the center of your parts. That's the kind of design intent stuff that's it's kind of hard to explain, but once you start seeing it and you start paying attention for it, it's like one of those aha moments that will make things a lot easier. Trying to stay around that symmetric idea whenever you can get it. So to the point of even doing plates like this, standard for me is always mid-plane. Again, because it gives you that one extra plane that runs through the thickness of your part. So now you can do the top surface, the bottom surface, and you have a plane right in the middle that you can use to set things up.
Why don't they make mid-plane the standard?
By default, it wants to go with a blind direction. I'm not sure why that particular one got driven. At least for the first boss, you would think that they would give you a mid-plane to start with as a standard. And as far as I know, there's no way to switch that to be the default. But so you do something like this. One of the other things I've picked up along the way, and I'm going to give credit to Norm Abrams, New Yankee Workshop. If you pay attention to his stuff at all, there's the old woodworking adage, you measure twice and cut once. He added to it that don't measure unless you have to. That was kind of a cool idea, and I thought about it for a little while, and that makes sense to use here. And what I mean by that is, if you don't have to dimension something, don't. Which is kind of a weird way to go at some things, but I'll use the Hole Wizard tool because there's a couple different things we can do with this that I'd like to demo. So when you go to put in Hole Wizard, if everybody's familiar with Hole Wizard, yeah, tapped holes, counterbores, countersinks, all that fun stuff. So for anybody who's not, basic functionality turns into anywhere you put a point, you get a hole, which is great. Most people that I've run into will go through and, okay, here's our points in. And as soon as they've got those, they'll start doing this dimension thing where you go, I want this one this far from this edge. Right? You go through and dimension everything off. The other option that's available that some people don't take advantage of is Solidworks ignores everything that's not a sketch point when you do a Hole Wizard. So lines, circles, arcs, squares, anything else you draw gets ignored. So if I want to make a box pattern out of this stuff, number one, I probably could have drawn them more like a box shape to start. But now, with it, yeah, put your box in first, or you can come back and, there's umpteen ways we can do this. Do this kind of stuff. SolidWorks essentially ignores everything else on here. Now, this does two things for me. If you draw in the sketch this way, whether you draw the box first and then drop the points on the corners, or you drop the points in and then draw the sketch afterwards, having it set up this way, you'll notice that there's a sketch relation of a horizontal on the lines and then it's vertical on these lines. Because the sketch endpoints are on the endpoints of those lines, the hole pattern I've got now is a nice rectangular hole pattern, and they stay stuck together and follow each other along. Now you can do that with just a regular sketch relation. I can come in here and I can take this one and I can tell them to be horizontal. That functionally behaves exactly the same as this line. The only difference is this is not always visible, right? And so what I mean by that is, again, I drew this, I know exactly what's going on. If somebody else opens this one up, to dig back through and to go, wait a minute, why can't I just move this where I want? Why is this stuck? Now in this case it's pretty easy. You get a little dotted line that shows up here between them, so that helps a little bit. As you start to get bigger and more complicated sketches, you'll start to notice random relations between things. Especially if you get into some fairly complicated, like circular patterns and some other things, you'll get horizontal and vertical relations that'll snap between points that you didn't intend to, or they'll snap to a line or something else. Where then digging back through trying to figure out why your whole pattern is messed up can be a real pain. So whenever possible, if I can get away with it, I will use sketched things like this to be able to designate where that stuff has to go. So that's one advantage. Something else I'm going to do here in a minute. If we throw a... again, I'm not used to this. Alright, here we go. I'm going to take and put just a simple sketched hole through this thing. Doesn't matter where it is. Say I need to be able to put a hole pattern around this thing. There's a hole through the plate. I'm going to put a cat plate on top of it when we're all done. So I could have a hole pattern relative to this, which I just did this out of habit. In SolidWorks you have the option to do front, top, left, right, bottom, front, all those normal orthographic views of a part. You can also get an isometric and a normal too. Those are all on control and then number keys. So control 1 gets you front, 2 is back, 3 is left, right, top, bottom, ISO, and then normal 2 is 8. If anybody's a keyboard monkey like me who stays off the mouse whenever you can get away with it, those are huge. So control 8 got me a normal 2. So if I want to put a hole pattern around this, I'm going to go back into my command here. We're going to put a tap. That seems a little small. Let's go bigger. What, quarter 20. Okay. So now I've got a hole pattern that I want to put around here, but it needs to be relative to the center of this hole. I want this to be intelligent enough so that if this hole moves, I want my 4-hole pattern to follow. So, you know, we can go through and, okay, I'm going to draw my little box. I'm going to make my pattern all the way I want it to be, right? We're going to go horizontal, vertical. Okay, so now I've got the whole pattern the way I want. Now how do I get this to be relative to the center of this circle? Now, one of the ways I've seen a lot of folks do, you go then, well, if I was doing this anywhere else, I'd just go grab a sketch point, would throw it in the middle, and then I can use the center of this circle. But that leaves you a tap off into nowhere. If I turn this on, let's see, will it actually do it? Ah. No valid edge for this one could be found. And if you go and detail this one later, it would say that there are 5 instances of this tap when there's only actually 4 holes. So this causes some problems later, especially if you go in and start detailing your stuff. So I'm going to go back in and look at our sketch. What I will do here at this point, someone else pointed this out to me and I wish I remember who, because it was a fantastic point. If you go grab a center line, put a center line off anywhere, doesn't matter where. There's now a point here that you can use that's not a sketch point as far as SolidWorks is concerned. So it's not going to try and put a tap or a counterbore or countersink or anything else. It's just there. So from here, you can go through and if I put a diagonal on this, now I can grab that end or that point in the middle, grab this line, do a midpoint. Now this pattern is stuck to the circle wherever it goes, and I can dimension it out to whatever it needs to be. Right. If I want this to be a truly square pattern, I can dimension the other one the same, or if I take the two of them and make them equal, again, we're going to go back to that design intent thing. If I only have to dimension one thing, I'm only going to dimension one thing. If I truly want this to be a square. If I'm not sure, if I'm thinking it's probably going to be a square for now, but it might be a rectangle later, I might not make these equal. I might put in 2 different dimensions so then you can drive them separately. It goes back to that intent thing a little bit when you go to define some of this stuff, taking an extra second to go, wait a minute, how am I going to use this, or how might I have to use this? By setting it up this way, one dimension changes everything. I'm all set and ready to go. But that limits what options I have, because I can't do the rectangle option again without going in and doing a little extra work. So it's a trade-off. If I think I'm going to stay this way, it's super fast. I think I need to go.
If you do the center rectangle, you just hover over the edge of the circle, then go to the middle and pick the center of the circle, and then do it.
Yep.
You don't have to draw yours to that.
Yep, exactly. You could put the box in first and then drop your sketch points back on.
That actually puts a hole on center too, because it's considered a point on center.
That is correct. I forgot that. That's when you do a center rectangle, it does put a sketch point at that midpoint.
You can delete it though, and then
Yes.
grab both lines and the point. Delete the center point and then grab both lines in the center of the circle. Make it intersect.
Yeah, let's do that once, just so everybody's aware. So what we're talking about is this center point. I'm going to run over here to these teeny tiny little deal, right?
Before you click on that, if you were to just click for construction,
Ah.
you made a construction line.
True. So what he's talking about, here, let's just nuke it and start over. So if you go click to start it, you can go, where is it from?
Just go ahead and click there and then go from
Stays construction. There we go. There. So this is the point in question they're talking about. So if I get rid of this point, they're saying if I get this line, and the circle, it's like the midpoint. Can we get it that way? Yeah, you can get midpoint and go concentric. You can do that too. Yep.
I got a question. Let's say you're doing like job after job. You have certain patterns you use or certain size tap holes.
Yep.
Can you set up a macro for that, where you maybe have to assign a starting point and then?
You can do macros like that.
I mean, you know, like you're doing a sketch like this.
Yep.
If you do that all the time, maybe you can
Yes,
set up a macro.
you can write macros like that. I've seen other people go and grab and put features into a SolidWorks library that you can drag a specific hole pattern out of the library and drop it. That's a little more involved to set up. Once you got them, they're great because it's drag and drop onto a surface. Just pick a couple of points and locks everything in and away you go. Anytime you get into that repetition thing where you've got the same type of hole pattern, the same size, the same boss, same whatever, those kind of features you can get into a SolidWorks library. They take a little bit of monkey work to set them up in there the way you want them. That's been my experience with trying to set them up. On the upside, once they're in, they're a huge time saver, especially if there's some crazy complicated things where it's not just a couple of seconds to make a little box pattern like this. If you've got a specific, you have a non-standard hole size or a non-standard pattern or something else that you nail down once, if you can get that into a library, we can pull it back out. If you want some ideas on where to go or where to start looking for that, you can talk to me afterwards and I can give you a couple ideas on kind of the direction ahead for some of that.
You can also possibly use a block for that.
Sketch block? Yeah. I suppose I haven't thought about doing that either. Yeah, you can grab a sketch block and be able to drop those back in with a set pattern. You'd have to have a point to lock it down back to something else, but I'm assuming everybody's fairly familiar with what a sketch block is, but you'd get this all set up with 1 or 2 points and lock it down, and you could drag those in from a library too. All that kind of stuff will work. That's one of the cool things about a SolidWorks Hole Wizard is it's driven from a sketch this way, so that there's a lot of things that you can do sketch-wise between blocks and macros and pulling things out of a feature library to speed this up a whole lot if you run into it. Anyway, regardless of how we do it, whether you grab the midpoint and go to the center, or if I end up throwing it this way just to be able to make things quicker, and for me this makes a lot of sense. I see it, I immediately know what's going on. If you're the only one playing with your stuff, or you've got a group that goes about it the same way, grabbing a midpoint and doing it works exactly the same, just looks different. Lots of options for how to do this. All of that fun stuff to say when this is all set in the way it should be. If I go grab and move all my stuff, my whole pattern goes with it, which was the whole point of this thing, to try and lock that stuff down and take advantage of some of the parametric stuff there. So, if we go back to the big chicken coop here, one of the things that, one of the two different design techniques you can run at things with, and again, this is nomenclature that SolidWorks has played with for a long time. Top-down versus bottom-up design. So the idea of a top-down design, you can open an assembly, you can put a part in it, you can start working on that part in the assembly. You can add another part and another part and another part, and you could never actually open a part on its own and have a full assembly when you're all done. That's kind of the ultimate dream. Everything's all super related to each other, and it works really, really cool until it doesn't. Yeah, there's people joking. They've seen stuff blow up before. There's a trade-off. All that relation stuff's really cool in their one file. It gets hard to take things away and use them later. The old way of doing it was bottom-up. You would go sit in the corner, design a part. When that part was completely done, you brought it into the assembly, put it in there, and that was it. There was no relationships. There was no intelligence between anything else. That one's super stable, hard to break things. It's also really hard to update. So the magic happy point is someplace in the middle. If you go purely top-down or purely bottom-up, you're going to be in trouble. So what I've done in here, for instance, is a lot of the paddles and stuff for this are set up, and I knew what they had to be size-wise when I started them. So I made them, brought them in that way. Gives me the big, rough parts in the positions that they need to be. And at that point, then you can start to do some of your relational stuff, like mounting holes, tapped holes, that kind of thing. If you've got a couple different parts that have to be tied specifically to the size of another thing, you can start to do that. But having a raw part to start with, that's the rough size and shape you need, is going to save you a lot of time and a little bit of sanity if you have to make changes later. So whenever you can, I'm going to need a plate. Well, let's go make a plate first. It doesn't really matter what size, but let's get one and bring it in and work from that direction. I'm trying to think if there's a good example of that one in here. Not super fantastic. One of the things that someone asked for a little demo on, or to see kind of how some stuff works, was the weldment tool. I don't know how many people use the weldment tool at all, seen it, aware of it. It's kind of that's one of those, it's kind of like surface modeling in SolidWorks. People know you can do it, but nobody really wants to because it can be a little bit, I was going to say sketchy, but that's a horrible pun considering. Yeah, let's ignore I said that. Okay, so they don't have to be that bad. So this is simple 2x4 stud construction. It's really easy. There's nothing complicated in here at all. So if you're thinking about playing with a weldment at all, you can start simple. You can do a simple 2D sketch and make a weldment from it, which is what this is. So what a weldment is and how it works is you have a sketch. It's a simple line sketch. Set it up, put all the dimensions on, lock it down the way you want. You can go to a 3D sketch if you want to go crazy big. I mean, I've seen like car roll cages and stuff all done off one 3D sketch. I don't want to imagine the migraines it took to get there, but once it's done, that's really cool. So once you have a simple sketch, which in this case, let's roll back to it. So this is just a simple sketch on the origin that way. So the way this stuff is going to work, here, let me do this. Do a file save as so we can rip this thing apart a little bit. Pick the wrong option. Alright. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to knock off the bottom of this stuff, like take the weldment off, and then we're going to put it back in, I hope. Okay, so once I've got my sketch, you can go into the, where is it here? All these tabs up here too. Sorry, again, I keep doing stuff without explaining a little bit. If you right click on these are all the different options for toolbars that you can have up in your command manager. Weldment's there, just click it on. Once you go, at this point I've got a sketch. I want to add a structural member. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to put my 2x4 stuff back on it, but we can pick something different. So I'm going to go, you end up having a standard type and then a size to pick from, and all that's going to do is pick what your structural member looks like, an I-beam, a 2x4, whatever you need to use. So we'll go with rectangular tube, roughly the right size, right? Okay, so this is what I'm going to put in. So at this point all you need to do is pick where you want these parts to go. So there's two rules when it comes to doing this. You can either do a loop or you can do individual segments. And what I mean by a loop is I'm going to pick a loop just on the outside of like this. You can do that.
Picking in the loop pattern?
Yeah, you pick a closed loop versus the other option is picking segments like this. You can't just go through and pick everything the way, you know, if I want everything, all these lines are going to need a member on them when we're all done. Picking them all at once doesn't play nice. And what I mean by that is, let's do this. I'm going to go back and put this in the way I would normally build it. So when you do the outsides here, we're going to look at it, and you're going to see this is what the weldment tool does, right? So this sketch profile is the profile of our 3" by 2" 1/4" wall tube. And what it's doing is it's taking the origin point of that sketch and it's putting it on the line that I drew and it's extruding it down the length of the line. And that's doing the next segment, the next segment, the next segment. You have options for how you can play with it at this point. So over here we have apply a corner treatment. So by default it wants to be on a 45 mitered bend, so it's going to take the two pieces and make them look nice just like we're seeing them here. This would be exactly the way you would want to do this if you're welding it, right? You have the option to go through and do a lap joint this way or the other way, but in addition to that you can go point by point then and decide that, hey, I want to have this one be a 45, so this one's a 45 now, or a mitered corner. This one still stayed a lap. Come over here and I could change the direction on this one. I want it to go the other way. That one will leave, right? So you can set up your corner treatments the way you want to that way. You don't have to do a corner treatment either. If you uncheck this box, all it does is run them along the raw sketch points. And we can come back later and trim these. We can have Solidworks tell us which way, or we can tell Solidworks how we want everything to play out. So I'm going to leave a corner treatment on that one. I'm going to make it be a 45 everywhere. Okay. So I've got two lines left here in the middle that need to get something added to them. I want it to be the same size tube, so all I'm going to do is hit new group. And what Solidworks does is treat the outside stuff as that I've already done as set in the way it needs to be, and now I'm off to pick my next set of parts. So I went ahead and picked these two then. So the reason I did it this way is these are now on center the same way the last ones were, right? So there's our sketch profile and there's the origin of the sketch, just running down the length. The first group we did, you'll notice, it picked the origin as well. Well, when I drew my sketch, I said, okay, the sketch is going to be the outside edge of my frame. The frame needs to be inside that whole thing, which, as we can see right here, it's not. The frame is actually going to be wider by 2 inches now because of the thickness of the tube. What I can do with this group, and this is why the grouping thing comes important, for this entire group, what I can do is come down and hit way on the bottom, locate profile. What it'll do is zoom in on this, and now I can pick any point I want on here, and it will take that point and attach it to the line. So now as soon as I pick that, it snaps everything to the inside. So now that sketch that I had, which when I drew it, my intent was that sketch is the outside maximum size of my frame. Now as I drive that sketch to be whatever size it needs to be, my frame will be on outside edges that size, right? So because of the way the grouping works, we go back and look, this second group didn't change as far as where that sketch was located. It still runs right down on center, which is the way I wanted it to be. You can also take that, you could do these individually if you wanted. Let's say you needed this one shifted to the inside and you wanted this one shifted to the inside. You could do, let's do that just to show what that looks like. If I have just this one post here, I can take this one and I'm going to shift it to the inside that way. So now the sketch runs down there. Do a new group again, pick this one. Let's throw it for a curveball. Let's take this one, and I want to have this one turn 90 degrees from everything else, because that's the other thing you run into when you don't have a symmetrical extrusion. When you don't have a square extrusion, can you flip this thing? There's an option for that right here. I can take this, turn just this one 90 degrees. So you have options to be able to go through. This is where groups are going to be your friends. Anything that you want to behave the same way, group when you walk through them. Okay, so once all of that fun stuff is done, you hit OK, and it's done. There it is.
For them to have the ability to be aware of all the various parts, does it have to be all in the same sketch, or could this be actually have done with, could this have been done with 2 sketches?
This could have been done, each individual line segment could be its own sketch if you want.
And be aware of all the other
Yep.
elements.
So the cut list at this point is going to run through, and basically it picks up all of the solid bodies that are in there. And let's see here, I'm going to have to update. Okay, yeah, they're all different because of the way they're cut up. But this automatically will go through, and on a rebuild, I believe. Let me check. Oh, I don't have any duplicates. That's why. But yeah, this is aware of everything that's in here. In fact, I'll take that back. It has already figured that out. These two are the same piece, even though they're rotated 90. It knows they're the same thing. So the other thing to point out here when you do weldments is it doesn't have to be one sketch, and it doesn't have to be all at the beginning. So now that I have this, if I want to do another sketch in here for a smaller frame, that has to be inside here. But I want, you know, what's in here to be based on the size of the tube I pick. I can do another sketch in here and do another weldment right inside here, and keep going. So this same stuff, the same way all this stuff happened in a 2D world, the exact same stuff can happen in a 3D sketch. It's just more complicated to make the sketch in the front, because 3D sketching can get a little needy sometimes, we'll say. Sorry, it's a little sporadic and a little chaotic, but there's some stuff I picked up along the way. Any questions from anybody? Stuff I can try and get in the last couple of minutes before we go for dessert?
Can you make your 2x4 profile? How do you get other profiles?
2x4 profile. So
Steel and whatever you have, angle and square tube. Or
yep,
whatever.
yep. So those are looking for a specific location on your hard drive. Let's go find it a second.
Oh, they're on the right hand column.
Hmm?
On the side there, the right hand column, that second tab, design library.
Yep, design library.
Should be profiles.
Not here by default. Not mapped to this one. Okay, so what it ends up being, file locations, and if we go to weldment profiles. So in this location on this box, so C program file Solidworks Corp 2015, blah 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 blah. You get in this weldment profiles folder, right? Once you get inside there, what you will end up seeing is, and I'm going to do this because it's faster this way. When you get in there, there will be 2 folders. One says ANSI inch and one says ISO. Inside of the ANSI inch folder, you will find a folder named angle iron, C channel, pipe, bump, bump, bump. And inside of that folder, then you will find sketches named this way. So any sketch that you have in SolidWorks, you can turn into a weldment profile. And you do
So be it a 2x4 or be it 80-20.
Doesn't matter. Define the sketch, go through, once you have just the sketch, so you'll make a SolidWorks part, make the sketch, do a file save as. Here, let me make sure we're doing it right.
If you're going to do that and try and add to your library,
Mm-hmm.
try to start with, say, the square tube, and you want to add more sizes to it. Try and copy or save as
Yeah.
of the one that you have. Because if sometime down the line you decide to change from a 2x2 tubing to a 3x2 tubing or a 4x4 tubing, and you have stuff made it to those spaces or surfaces, if you drew a new sketch instead of doing a save as,
Mm-hmm.
it'll lose that made. But if you started with that same sketch,
Oh,
same phase,
we gotta go this way.
it'll keep those made.
Yeah, that's exactly. If you're gonna go grab anything that's in there, go grab an existing one, copy it whenever you can. That's good practice just in general. Why remake it if you can go copy something to start from?
SolidWorks has a set of those you can download.
Yeah.
Parametric, where you pick a config.
Oh yeah.
Maintain the face IDs as well.
Yeah, there's.
And there's hundreds of them.
If you want to start getting into this, like I said, there's a lot of people who spend a lot of time making this work really, really well. In my case, the lumber stuff I made just because there was a couple sizes I had to play with. Good experience to go mess with that. What is it? Save selection? No. Remember how to get this sketch out. I forget. Shoot, I'm going to have to spend some time to figure out. I forget how to get the sketch out.
Save the part first.
To save a part?
Yep.
And
save
then
as
I can
the
go.
library feature part.
It's library feature part?
Yep.
Okay. Library feature part. There you go. So from here you can go through and set it. This just needs to be in that weldment folder, which is buried. Where's it? Lang, English, weldments. No. Anyway, I'm drawing a blank where I went to. You end up saving it in that same folder structure, and away you go.
So go find the folder, copy of weldment, tear it apart, rearrange it, or
Do what you want.
copy profile, rearrange it to whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other questions or points?
I got a question.
Yeah.
Related back to holes.
Yeah.
Do you happen to know, is it possible to create a library or a feature where you have, say, a counterbore hole for one plate and then a tap hole for another plate?
SolidWorks does that. You can do a whole stack is the name of it. And it's an assembly level feature, so once you've got your assembly with 2 plates on top of each other, you can put a whole stack in. At that point you go through and pick, hey, I want the clearance hole in this plate, I want the tapped hole in this plate. You can set that stuff up that way.
But you can make a library feature like that?
That is a combination that I have not tried, so I'm not sure.
I use aftermarket software for die design, and it's got, you know, I can stack bolts and stuff and everything, but I can't make a library where I can just pick a couple points and have them both drop in. I still have to
Yeah, I'm not sure. At a minimum, I would think you would be able to make a sketch to drive those locations, and then go to put in a whole stack and drop that sketch in as a block. You should be able to do that, I think. I have not tried that though. I don't normally use a whole stack. There's drawbacks to some of that too. Again, that comes with that. You get a lot of speed and everything if you do a whole stack, because you can take care of a whole number of parts together.
Right.
But then you lose some flexibility later on. So most of the environments I've been in, that flexibility was a must-have, so we didn't play with it much. But that's a super useful feature if you've got a situation where you can get that. Absolutely. Anything else? Otherwise, we're out of time. Hate for anybody to be late for dessert. So. Thank you.